My name is Anders Laub Christoffersen. I'm a Sitecore Technology MVP for the last many years. I formerly worked at a place called Petcha, the sister company of Sitecore. And then I also had a rather short period at Sitecore Services. But now I'm working as, I don't like to call it an independent contractor, but I'm working in my own company called Laub plus Co. You can find me on Twitter at Anders Laub, or the Sitecore Slack community, same handle, just with a dot between the Anders and the Laub. So, I like to start my presentations with outlining what you can expect. So try to align our expectations. So you as the audience will know both what you can and cannot expect to hear during this presentation. This talk is called Refactor to Sitecore Helix. So yes, it is mostly technical, and the target audience is primarily Sitecore developers with some prior knowledge of Sitecore Helix. This does not mean that you will not understand this presentation at all if you're not a developer, or if you do not know the Sitecore Helix conventions already. If I had a live audience, I would now ask how many of you have attended the Sitecore Helix workshop that Sitecore Services offer, and also I would ask how many of you that has worked on solutions that follow the Sitecore Helix conventions. Since you're not right in front of me right now, I cannot really get an answer on this. But during this talk, you will see a process on how you can refactor one of your existing solutions to following the Helix conventions. You will hear some of the experiences that I have gained while I've been involved in multiple refactoring projects, at least in the tens of projects that I have refactored to following the Helix conventions, or the predecessor called component architecture. When you leave this talk, you will hopefully have gained a better understanding of both why and how you should choose to refactor your solution to following the Sitecore Helix conventions. During this talk, you will not see any tool, as I have mentioned in the synopsis. You can say thank you to the mold that I found in my apartment. This simply took the time away, so I didn't have time to prepare the tools to be released. But I might find time to release these small handy tools prior to Symposium. But I will not promise anything since the mold issue has really taken all of my time lately. So, let's start with looking at some of the potential benefits that you can gain from refactoring your solution to following the Helix conventions. First, we have compliancy and compatibility. This means that your solution can become compliant with the various modules and extensions for Sitecore, such as the Sitecore Experience Accelerator, third-party modules, etc. The primary purpose, the reason why the Sitecore Helix conventions has been defined, is to ease maintenance. This is actually why we defined them in the first place. So one of the potential benefits is to reduce the cost of maintainability, to reduce the cost of maintaining the solution. Yeah, another potential gain is flexibility. It can become easier to add and remove functionality from an existing solution. It's easier to add new developers, onboard them, get them started on working on the solution code base. Just by following some common, well-defined conventions such as Helix internally within an agency or any development team, this is worth gold. Upgradability, I cannot promise you anything in this area, but a solution that follows the Helix convention should be easier to upgrade to future versions of Sitecore. This is a claim that I cannot directly prove, of course, because I do not know any future version of Sitecore. Refactoring can also bring a breath of new life to an aging solution, a fresh second take, and also fix deadlock situations where the code base simply has become too entangled. So it can be a good chance to clean up your code base. So what is Helix really? Helix, I do assume that most of you know Sitecore Helix and have read the conventions online and perhaps even attended workshops, presentations, and so on. But really quickly, Helix is a set of conventions that show you how you can structure and build your Sitecore solutions. They are made to ease maintenance and to ensure the longevity of the solution. You can see it as a standard for the Sitecore ecosystem, like an architecture standard. The Helix conventions are based on 6 principles of package design, which is defined by Robert C. Martin in the book Agile Principles, Patterns, and Practices. I would recommend you to buy this book if you don't know it already. So, Helix is also about compliancy. When you follow the conventions, you make your Sitecore solution Helix compliant. Habitat, Sitecore Habitat, for example, is a Helix compliant example site. You can use the examples that you find in Habitat in any Helix compliant Sitecore solution, more or less plug and play. SXA is Helix compliant. If your solution is also Helix compliant, then you more or less can guarantee that they can coexist in the same environment. Please note that SXA can also coexist with Sitecore solutions that are not Helix compliant. When you release a third-party module or some open source module, something that you want to share with the rest of the world, you can ensure that this module is Helix compliant. So anyone owning a Helix compliant Sitecore solution can install these modules. So a little bit more in details, then Helix gives you a way to visualize and manage the dependencies in your solution. It also gives you a well-defined methodology. You do not have to reinvent new methodologies each time you start a new project. You often see when you look at the different solutions at one agency, you can often see how a methodology has been evolving and then suddenly skipped because someone thought of another approach, and it seems like a lot of time and energy is more or less wasted on setting up the basic foundation. Helix also provides a common terminology. Often in software architectures, you hear the same words and pattern names and so on, but even though the words are the same, the meaning tend to be different. They're up for interpretation. Well, in Helix, we have a common terminology. So if we know Helix, we have the same understanding of these terms that you will find in Sitecore Helix. It's also quite a lot of paradigm shift from the conventional Sitecore development, because it moves the focus onto the business intents rather than how the implementation is actually performed. A very important note is that everything in Helix are modules. So no actual implementation can be outside a module. You, of course, have your development operations, your DevOps outside of modules, but all the implementations are made in a module that serves a certain purpose in the solution business domain. So all of this also supports sharing in the community. Sharing your experiences enables you to easier learn from others' experiences. So you might say that Helix also take us to the next level where we can better learn from one another. Really quickly, dependencies in Sitecore Helix. A quick recap of the layer convention in Sitecore Helix. So first, we have the foundation layer. This is the most stable layer. This is where your stable modules should go. We have the feature layer. This is flexible in terms of stability. And we have the project layer, or what I like to call the context layer, where you compose your features into a specific context. This is the least stable layer in Sitecore Helix and where your least stable modules should be. Dependencies should only move toward the foundation layer. Even though this is called layers, people who hear about this layer convention first interpret it as the classic 3/n tier layer architecture, where you have your data layer, your business layer, your presentation layer, or whatever you like to call them. The 3/n architecture exists in various forms. There is some resemblance because the layers are there to control your dependency direction, but other than that, the Helix layers are not the same. The Helix layer also provides you a framework for determining the level of abstraction within the modules. This is not something that you will find in 3 or 3/n tier layer architecture. So everything in Helix is a module, and no implementation can exist outside a module. The modules is defined by a single responsibility within the business domain, or as you could also call it, a single intent, a single purpose within the business domain. You should think of not really persons, but which roles there are in an organization, who are responsible to change a certain responsibility, which roles exist in the organization that you're creating this solution for. The goal is to have everything that has the same reason to change within the same module, and only what has the same reason to change, nothing else. So the coupling of modules, how they depend on one another, should follow the stable dependencies principle. The stable dependencies principle, as defined by Uncle Bob or Robert C. Martin, tells you only depend in the direction of stability. So, yeah, we have the foundation layer as the most stable, the feature layer, I like to call it flexible, and the project layer as the most, or the least stable, most unstable, the least stable layer in the in the layer convention. So, for example, the composition of renderings and content into a page, into something that gets delivered to the end user, a HTML output. This is as concrete as it gets. This means all your page type, how all your page compositions should be on the project layer, because these belong to a specific context. Renderings that output specific features, they're concrete implementation of the feature, but they're abstract in terms of context. And the foundation layer modules, these are concepts that can be used or are used across multiple features to obtain either domain or technical concerns. So, that was the stable abstraction principle. Helix also have a convention of grouping modules. So all features that relate to a specific overall purpose, you can group these. The grouping is only conceptual and does not dictate anything in regards to dependencies. The modules can still not depend on one another. So a typical, or let's call it conventional, Sitecore solution. This is what you see at many clients, agencies. This is an example of solutions that could potentially benefit from being refactored into Sitecore Helix. The code base will often be structured by its technical implementation, by a specific design pattern, or even a specific framework. This makes the dependencies rather unclear. You cannot, often you cannot really just visually get an overview of how the different entities in the solution depend on one another. And the whole approach to separation of concern is often mixed or unclear. Especially even within a development team, there can be different interpretations of the separation of concern, which means some developers put something somewhere while others put somewhere else. Dependencies can even seem random between different types because of the interpretation of the design patterns can vary. This also means that the different business intents that the client, that the customer actually wants implemented, often get entangled. So you can end up in situations where if you change something completely unrelated is affected by this change that you just implemented. I would recommend you to see this speak by Uncle Bob by Robert C. Martin. You can find it online on YouTube. It's called The Principles of Clean Architecture. One of his main points is that software architecture is about intent. And the web, the internet, is nothing more than a delivery mechanism. So frameworks that caters this delivery mechanism should not be the first thing that meets your eye when you open up a solution in Visual Studio or in Sitecore for that matter. So the screenshots you see here on the side is, some random small implementations that was made by different Sitecore employees. It's actually hard to find an open source Sitecore implementation out there that you can just use as an example, except for Sitecore Habitat, which is following the Helix convention, so it's not really a good example in this case. So why would you start to refactor into the Sitecore Helix conventions? What potential incentives could you have to start up a refactoring project? Well, a good reason or a good chance to start on a refactoring project could be that you had to do some new development on the solution. The customer requested some new feature, and you might as well use this as a chance to clean up the solution. Another one is if you inherited the solution from another Sitecore partner. Then the solution might not follow a convention that you're familiar with. So refactoring the inherited solution into following the Sitecore Helix conventions can be extremely beneficial, both for you and for the customer. You can even argue for the additional cost towards the customer that when the solution has been refactored, any Sitecore implementation partner can take over development on this solution. Another reason could be if you want to run Helix compliant extensions on this solution, for example, Sitecore Experience Accelerator, or if you want to benefit from a third-party module that follows the Helix conventions, etc., etc. Could also, just because you want to, you could start a refactoring. No, this is not a valid reason. This is definitely not a valid reason. So, before you even consider initiating a refactoring project, you should consider both the costs and the time that you have to spend on the refactoring. One might argue that it really should be a business decision, but it can often be difficult to explain to the business why it is needed. It depends on the technical expertise at the business. So a response from the solution owner could be, why didn't you just do this in the first place? Why is it that we have to pay for this now? So this moves it over to be like an architect decision, like the lead architect on the solution has to make this decision and ensure that it's well-founded. And the architect should also be able to explain the reason and the cost, the implications to the business. There is a big risk of a refactoring project. Everybody thinks, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Let's just put it in the backlog. And then the task, or rather multiple PBIs, just reside in the backlog and never ever get put into a sprint. It is always down prioritized. I would highly recommend, if you make the decision to refactor to Sitecore Helix, you should move it up as a top priority. The longer you wait getting started, the more refactoring work you need to do. You'll of course also have to consider if it's really worth the cost. what is the cost of refactoring, how much will it reduce maintenance cost, will it reduce the maintenance cost at all? Are there any of the incentives I mentioned on the previous slides? That gives it a financial reason to start the project. You should also consider how much it would cost to start from scratch. You might have situations where it's actually cheaper just to start a new solution from scratch and slowly get rid of the old one. You also have to look at the content structure within Sitecore. If it's a really old solution that started on, I don't know, even 5.3 or something like that, really old, it might be more cost effective simply to start from scratch and import the content to the new solution in other ways. So, before you begin a refactoring project, the very, very obvious, you need to back up everything. Of course, make sure that you do not screw up something and cannot roll back at all. You also need to branch out. Make sure you can roll back if you want to. You need to branch out the code and the data, or the data in the solution. And you also, if the solution is running in production, you of course need to keep a branch for hotfixing the running production environment. So you need to, this is also a good time to consider getting the actual production content back to the development environment. It's also a good time to consider upgrading Sitecore to the latest version. This can, of course, upgrading Sitecore can vary a lot in complexity and in time, so it can also be dangerous to get started on. But to fully benefit from Helix compliancy and all the latest modules and so on, you should be on 8.2 something. And if you are on 8.2x, then you might as well upgrade to 8.2 latest, because this is not really dangerous. And since you make a snapshot of your current environment, this is a good time to also upgrade Sitecore. It's also a good time to revise your development operation process and your tooling if this could need some tender care. So make a transition plan. Ensure that you keep track of changes that has to be merged back into the Refactor solution code base, and also ensure that you avoid deadlocks. That means avoid deadlocking any of your Sitecore environments. Of course, it's not good to tell the customer we cannot deploy this urgent hotfix before the refactoring is done and has been deployed. That's terrible if the hotfix is for a production environment, but it's also quite terrible to say we cannot deploy this urgent security hotfix to QA to test it before it goes into production, since QA environment is right now locked for the refactoring project. This is not good. Make sure you avoid these kind of deadlocks. So, I just noticed that the font I've been using on my own slides has not been included in the presentation now, the art of refactoring. Before I show you the process, or a process for refactoring, I will just talk a little about what is refactoring really. In my presentations, I like to have quotes, especially quotes from Wikipedia. So, code refactoring is the process of restructuring existing computer code, changing the factoring, without changing its external behavior. This is done to improve code readability and reduce code complexity. This is a quote from Wikipedia. What is code refactoring? So this is also both the purpose and the constraint when refactoring to Sitecore Helix. We do not want to change existing functionality if we are not giving this as a task explicitly. The refactoring to Sitecore Helix is done to improve code readability and to reduce complexity, among other things. So, another quote that I think is important in relation to refactoring is a quote from this guy, that's Robert C. Martin, or Uncle Bob. He made something or defined something that he calls the programmer's oath. Programmer's oath number 5 tells you that, or you state that I will fearlessly and relentlessly improve my creations at every opportunity. I will never degrade them. This means that when you open a piece of code as part of a refactoring process, then you should aim to leave it at least just a little bit prettier than when you found it in the first place. So, refactoring to Sitecore Helix. So, I tried to define a process based on my experiences in refactoring to Sitecore Helix, and the process is on a very high level, and I decided that I would divide it up into 3 phases. So, the first phase, you need to restructure your file system. You need to introduce a legacy layer, and then you need to black box all your existing code, all your definition items, everything, black box all your existing implementation within the legacy layer. When you have black boxed this, you need to verify that everything still works as expected, that you have not changed the external behavior of the system. In phase 2, you can restructure content items if needed. It's not sure that you need to restructure the content. It depends on how the solution, how the item structure under Sitecore/content is already. You should add a project layer module, so you have a context for your existing website, and then you should get started on the refactoring and add new modules if you have to add any new modules. Phase 3 is more or less a repetition of the last part of phase 2. Add modules and refactor existing responsibilities, and simply continue and continue and continue until there's no, now this solution is Helix compliant. Now it's done. It's a gradual process. You should not aim for perfection in the first one. It's iterative. It's an agile process. So, for this presentation, I had to find an example. I actually wanted to refactor a Sitecore solution live during the presentation. So it should be very simple, very, very simple. It should not belong to any specific customer. So I first looked at Sitecore Auto House, but then I found this small solution on GitHub, on the Sitecore community GitHub. Thank you, Martina, for the solution. I think it was made back in 2014 or something like that, and has not been maintained since then. It seems like it wasn't even fully implemented back then. And notice the very big disclaimer: do not use. Well, perfect. I'll use that one. First, I made the solution run on Sitecore 8.2 Update 4. So this is how the example website looked. So this means that this is the external behavior of the solution. The solution that we want to refactor. So we should try to leave this nice looking page intact. I don't know if this is how it was supposed to look, but this was at least how it looked when I had the solution up and running on 8.2 Update 4. Within Sitecore, all the content items was directly under Sitecore Content Home. We had a very classic setup. All the templates under a template folder called MVC Tutorial. All the fields on each template directly on field sections on that template. Layout definition items and rendering definition items, also very classic setup. Folder called MVC Tutorial, and then you had all the renderings. So in the file system and in Visual Studio, you had these two Visual Studio projects, one called MVC Data, one called MVC Tutorial. There was also a test project. I removed that one just to keep it simple. File system, in the files, in the two different solutions, you had various business intents all mixed up, some data, some in the MVC project, MVC Tutorial project, all front-end implementation in the MVC Tutorial project. I couldn't really understand why you had a Sitecore field helper on the MVC Tutorial, but you had some wrapper items in the data and so on. What decided what should be where? So, solution root, two folders, each containing a Visual Studio project. The folders were not even named the same as the projects. Can't remember if that's actually renamed it. Might be. So, getting started with refactoring this small solution. First step, restructure the solution folders, create a legacy layer, black box all the existing code in legacy modules, and make the solution run again. So, the basis for following the Helix conventions. You need some layer folders in the file system. You need some layer folders in Visual Studio. To create these, I used my own Visual Studio extension called Helix Visual Studio Templates. You can find it on Visual Studio extensions and update. I have received some mixed feedback and a few bugs. I'm also looking for a better name for the extension, but yeah, I missed time to wrap it up into a real version 1.0. So, created a clean solution, click within Visual Studio, few clicks, and this gave me an empty solution. And this created the folder structure both in the file system and in Visual Studio. So then I had to add the layer folder items, the project feature and foundation layer items within Sitecore under templates, layouts, renderings, branches. placeholder settings, system settings, so on and so forth. What I did was I made a package from Sitecore Habitat that contains these folder items, because I actually want these folders to have the same IDs, the same item IDs as the folders in Sitecore Habitat. If someone from Sitecore is listening to this presentation, I would highly recommend that these folders become standard out of the box in Sitecore. Up until then, you can actually download a Sitecore package with the layer folders from this URL down here and install it in your solution. Oh, I can see that time is running, so I will speed up a little bit. I introduced the legacy layer, or simply created the folders for it. So to look at conceptually, the legacy layer, where does that fit into the Helix layer convention? Well, the legacy layer is above the project layer. This means that the legacy layer can depend on any of your Helix modules, but none of your Helix modules should ever depend on anything on the legacy layer. This is why I call it blackboxing. You're blackboxing dependencies. So blackboxing the legacy code. Yeah, well, I created a legacy project, ensure that the folder structure resembles how you find it in Sitecore Habitat. You have the code and serialization folder. I renamed assemblies, changed default namespace. I used Refactor to adjust the namespaces within the solution. This is actually quite important. Ensure that you clearly visualize all the legacy code using the namespaces. Ensure that you can see by the project name in Visual Studio that this is legacy, to avoid making accidental dependencies. So this also means that you have to update a lot of textual references within both scope and so on. I made a configuration file for defining the project. I created a project layer module here and added the configuration for a site definition and so on. And then I continued until the solution could build. And then within Sitecore, created a legacy layer folder, moved the existing definition items into this layer folder, and renderings, layouts, models, placeholder settings, everything. Changed the assembly references, the class references within Sitecore to contain to have the new namespace names, assembly names, changed paths when needed, and so on. Then I published everything and verified that it still works. This took me about not more than 20 minutes in the solution. It's quite quick, but for most Sitecore solutions, this is a big restructuring. This also means goodbye to your version control history. It means complete restructuring of most of your solution. So when you have verified everything still works, this is actually a really good time to deploy, to make this a milestone point, get this out into production. because then you can start doing the work without blocking any environments. So what we did in phase 1 is we created a clean solution. We created a folder for a legacy layer in the file system and the Visual Studio solution. We moved all the existing code into the new legacy layer. We renamed namespaces, assemblies to visualize it as legacy code. And we moved the definition items in Sitecore into legacy folder items. And we verified that it worked. As I mentioned, this is a major breakup with your version control typically. The task is also very hard to split out to several developers. The merging time that you have to spend will often exceed the time that you actually spend on actual work. So in most cases, this is a one developer's job, restructuring the whole solution. It can be anywhere between 1 hour to several days of work. The work can be very repetitive sometimes on some solutions. Some will find it boring, some will find it relaxing, depending on how you view it. But you can use PowerShell extensions and script your way out of the repetitive time. Sometimes this can save you a lot of time. But of course, it also takes time to test the scripts and so on. Phase 2, restructure the content if needed. It might not be needed on all solutions. It was on this. We want website root items. We want to move the settings item and home beneath this website root. The content structure in most Sitecore solutions does luckily somewhat resemble the recommended structure that you see in Sitecore Helix. For some solution, what we want is like the tenant item, tenant, context, and then the start item. So tenant root, website root, start item, or home. And then here in phase 2, we will also start to extract some concrete responsibilities from the legacy implementations into modules. I can see that I have 9 minutes left, so I will hurry up. I added a project layer module using my Visual Studio extensions. I moved, this is a very important note, I moved the front-end implementation into the project layer module. This is a very, very pragmatic approach. We actually have an implicit dependency on the design implementation where the design implementation, the classes and so on, the scripts are defined on the project layer, but we will start to use these on the feature and on the, only the feature layer, hopefully. And this is not really nice. Also created a new layout, copied the layout from the legacy code. It's called default CSS HTML. Within Sitecore, define this layout, define placeholder settings, and so on. Under templates, made a tutorial website project. A tutorial website module that has a site root item under content types and a new page type home. And then I actually copied the home item and changed template on it, and then moved it down here. The reason for this is because the existing home item have the item ID of the home item that ships with Sitecore. This is not good. I wanted to have another item ID for the home, but I wanted to keep the content for the items beneath the home. I moved these down as children to the new home, keeping the data source references everywhere. So moving the fields, I took the whole content section from the old home legacy here and moved it up into a new interface template I created called _content, and then I let the new home implement this interface template. This means that the content from the old home, the dollar name actually, is kept. I then moved the rendering under into the correct location in Sitecore. This is how the view rendering content looked when I opened it. So I opened it, so I tried to leave it a little bit prettier than it was before. It's still not perfect, but I believe that I made it a little bit prettier. So I added, in this phase, I also added 2 new foundation modules, which was needed. Sitecore extensions, more or less just copied directly from Sitecore Habitat, contains a lot of nice Sitecore extension methods for items, fields, so on that I use all the time. So I had to have that one. And then also a serialization project, more or less copied directly from Sitecore Habitat. Remember, content is king. I quickly identified a responsibility called car. You could probably also have called this responsibility this business intent for vehicle or something. I don't know. Car seemed like a sensible, plausible name. I moved all the field into a I created a new interface template called car details and moved the field section from the existing car template, keeping all the field IDs intact. So then I moved the car template down as a page type because that is actually what it is, and let this page type implement the interface template. And when I then look at the content, all the content is still there, even though I completely restructured the templates. So within the code, I moved I created a new feature module car in Visual Studio, moved the view renderings, made the code a little bit more pretty, moved the model definition item within Sitecore, moved the rendering items, verified that everything still works, and it did. And now the actual spotlight presentation of the car here comes from a feature module, which follows the Helix conventions. I also added a new feature module called metadata. I don't want to bore you with implementation details. You can see here I suddenly have a page title, which was not there before. So important steps in phase 2 is to refactor the content structure if needed, create project layer modules, and start to extract the different contexts from the legacy code into project layer modules. This is initiating the process of identifying different responsibilities in the legacy solution, and extract these as needed and add new modules as needed or required by the business. Phase 3, rinse, repeat. Keep doing the same. I added a navigation feature. I extracted a driver responsibility from the old code. I also implemented some list pages. You can see the navigation up here. We now have a static navigation up here, home, cars, drivers. I made a list page. And to honor Martina, I found the most Swedish person I could think of, and made this test page. The Swedish chef, meatball driver. So this is the current state of the example solution. It's starting to move towards the Helix conventions. This is an ongoing process. It has to be done gradually. Some legacy implementations might never be Helixified, you can call it. So, learning points, or what I wanted to show you in this presentation. Refactoring to Helix is an ongoing process. You should not expect a big bang. It has to be done agile and gradually. Make clear milestone points where you can deploy the current state of the solution. It's quite easy to keep your content intact. You just simply move all the field items to new interface templates and use the existing templates for definition items, page types, and data source templates. You simply keep these intact, move these to the corresponding new modules that you create. Restructuring the file system and blackboxing the legacy code is typically the biggest and most important step. It is, in my experience, required to do this as the initial step. Within the black box code, you should ignore any internal dependencies. You should ignore code smells and bad practices within this legacy layer code. You only should take care of it when it's relevant. Only when you need to extract the responsibility, you should handle it, or if it creates havoc in the solution. The legacy layer can depend on Helix modules and not the other way around. Avoid depending on legacy code. Your feature and foundation modules especially should never ever depend on legacy code. If you have some foundational within your legacy layer, you should extract this responsibility into a foundation module or several foundation modules, but still be pragmatic. In most cases, front-end implementations are way too expensive or even impossible to refactor into following the Sitecore Helix convention strictly. So always consider the cost and impact. Identify and extract implemented responsibilities when you need to, not before. Remember to think of roles in the business to identify the different code responsibilities and move these implementations into modules where the name of the module clearly states the intent. Do not aim for perfection in the first run. Remember programmer so number 5, leave it a little bit prettier than when you found it, or a lot prettier. Just improve it gradually. So, some very quick apps. My company offers workshops and assistance if you need this in regards to refactoring your solutions to Sitecore Helix. You're more than welcome to contact me on any of these, on LinkedIn, Twitter, on my email, or even on the Sitecore community Slack channel. The Helix Visual Studio templates that I showed during this presentation, it's an open source project on GitHub. Download it via Visual Studio, report box, and contribute to the development, please. I do not have the time to maintain it and give it the the care that it really deserves. So I'm looking for contributors. I would also like to give it a new name, so name suggestions are welcome. Use the above contact details to if you want to contribute, report bugs, so on and so forth. So, thank you, everyone.